On paper, there is no reason why I should be an addict. Tate Sams joins us from Blue Ridge Mountain Recovery to talk about not feeling good enough, not belonging, addiction, the loss of friends to the disease, taking stock in relationships, and finding balance. He shares his journey through multiple geographic relocations and finding meaning in helping people. Enjoy. Welcome to the Illuminate Recovery podcast. We shed light on mental health issues, mental illness, and addiction recovery, ways to cope, manage, and inspire. Beyond the self-care we will discuss, you may need the help of a licensed professional. My name's Kurt Nider. I'm a husband, a father, entrepreneur, a handyman, and a student of life. I avoid conflict, I deflect with humor, and I'm fascinated by the human experience.
And I'm Shelley Mangum. I am a clinical mental health counselor, and my favorite role of all times is grandma. I am a seeker of truth, and I feel like life should be approached with tremendous curiosity.
I ask the dumb questions.
I fill in the gaps.
The Illuminate Recovery podcast is brought to you by Illuminate Billing Advocates. Make billing and collection simple with leader in substance abuse and mental health billing services. Verification and analysis of benefits, pre-authorizations, utilization management, accurate claim submission and management, denial and appeal management, and industry-leading reporting. Improve your practice's cash flow and your ability to help your clients with Illuminate Billing Advocates.
Kurt and I have the privilege of talking with Tate Sams today. Tate is the business development representative at Blue Ridge Mountain Recovery Center. Tate grew up in the greater Atlanta area and studied business management at the University of Alabama. Throughout his life, Tate struggled with substance abuse, and it's taken a toll on himself, not only himself, but his family relationships as well. It's been a while since Tate's been a client at Blue Ridge, but he was back there doing treatment at one point and loved the staff, loved the experience, and he's back there now. So Tate, thanks for being here. Thanks for spending some time with us and our listeners. Maybe just start a little bit. I know you have a story, a recovery story, and maybe start there of how did you end up in the recovery world? Kind of what was your background and what got you here? And then we'll just kind of go from there. But I always love the story and what, because it really shares something about what makes you tick and what you love.
Sure. No, again, thank you guys so much for having me. And yeah, it's kind of, what Kurt, what you were talking about is I never grew up wanting to be in recovery. When I was a kid, thinking about where I wanted my life to go and the direction that I wanted it to go. I was never wanting to be a 25-year-old homeless heroin addict in Atlanta, right? That was just, that wasn't my top five, right?
And a lot of them don't want to be in recovery either.
Right. So, no, absolutely. So, growing up, whenever I get asked to speak a lot around the Atlanta area, different programs and different meetings, and I always kind of start off by saying, on paper, there's no reason why I should be a drug addict, right? And going around, being in the rooms, talking to different people in recovery, I was always kind of a black sheep in a way, because I come from a great home. Right. My parents have been married for like 36 years. They were high school sweethearts. It's one of those things that's like, I couldn't have asked for a better family to be born into. I'm the oldest of three, and we grew up in an upper middle class white area of Atlanta suburb called Alpharetta, same place that Joe's from. And, on paper, I should be an accountant somewhere, right? Like that's how my life should look. And that's how a lot of people that I grew up with and went to high school with, like that's how their lives turned out. Unfortunately, I had a little deviation to get to where I am today. but, you know, I can look back and see that the alcoholism and the drug addiction was prevalent in my life before I ever picked up alcohol or drugs, right? I was kind of born with this innate feeling of never being good enough. And I don't really know where that came from, right? My dad and my mom always told me they loved me. There's no reason why I should have been born with this that hole, right? That so many addicts and alcoholics talk about. But I was born with it. And no matter the situation that I was in, I was always one of those people that didn't feel like I belonged. And I had a ton of friends growing up, and I was always pretty popular throughout middle school and high school. And I played sports. And for whatever reason, I just still never felt like I fit in. And I don't really know where that came from, right? It was just one of those things that I was born with. And it's still prevalent in my life today. I kind of run with it in a different direction now. Now, this thing that I've kind of learned to live with it and manage it, and it's gotten better. I use it in my professional sense to essentially drive me to achieve what I want to professionally, personally, never being satisfied with where I am, always being looking forward to grow. You know, it still takes a toll on personal relationships to this day. I still go to therapy to try to deal with it, right? At almost 5 years sober, like I still am actively engaged in some sort of personal work to try to, as best I can, put that into remission. But it's funny how the one thing that drove me to use drugs and alcohol in my life is the thing that's driving me to not only be a better person, you know, it's the thing that drives me today to essentially want to achieve more with my life.
But
right?
It's such a like fine level of balance too, right? Because we know that addiction's not about substance, right? We
Right.
know that in the industry, and so it's super easy to turn that into workaholism or this chasing a perfection myth, and so there's still this balance of at some point. It's great to replace addiction with something better, right? There's nobody's going to fault you for that. And then at the same time, there's this at some level, what's good enough? Like at some level, how do you just decide the Tate that is the Tate that's worth loving, being comfortable with, which is a tricky balance, right? I mean, I'm sure that comes up in weekly therapy.
Oh,
pretty often, right? But
absolutely. I mean, it even came up last night. So ever since I got sober, one of my like big passions today is playing tennis. Like I play tennis year round. Like I'm fully invested. I go to the gym and I love the gym, but I hate running. Right. So I'm like a dog. I need like a ball to chase around for a couple hours. So that's how I do my cardio. And me and one of my buddies last night, we got done playing a tennis match and we won. And, walking off the court, I'm like, dang, I played terrible, right? Even though we won like pretty easily, right? And like before he said, like, he's like, hey, man, he's very much like me too. He's like, hey, man, how did you think you played? And I was like, well, I wanted to say I played terrible. But thinking back, dude, we won and I actually played pretty good. He's like, dude, that's progress for you.
Yeah, that's the goal, right? You accomplished the goal. Don't ruin it.
Right. And I'm pretty good. But you're right. Like it's still something in it. Like I said, it's cost me personal relationships since I've been in recovery. But it's something that I still struggle with to this day and probably will always struggle with. But it's also something that I know if I continue to practice the principles of this program, be honest with myself and kind of where I'm at and stay involved in some sort of therapeutic work that I can definitely put it into remission. Right. I mean, it's essentially my greatest character defect.
So what do you mean when you say it's cost you personal relationships?
So, personal relationships, essentially, for me, I think my biggest one would be with my family, right? So I have a girlfriend, and I have for a long time. We've had some breakups in the past where I was way more focused on work and, the end goal for my career, right? And that perfectionism that I strive for so much, that I was more focused on that than her, right? My family, like my parents, my brother, and my sister, not getting to see them enough, or even when I am with them, I'm more, engaged with my phone, with answering emails or phone calls, than being able to turn off the phone at 5 o'clock and just be present with them. And so I saw myself, not so much today, but in the past. I mean, I've gotten a lot better, but I wouldn't say that it's cost me relationships like heroin did, but it's definitely not been beneficial for me, right? And I was grateful in a way for COVID happening, because it really made me look at what's important in my life. And it really, because when COVID happened, the work kind of slowed down, and there's really nothing that you can do.
Yeah.
So when that kind of happened, it kind of forced me to realize, like, hey, Blue Ridge could burn down tomorrow for all I know. And I mean, that's a real possibility, right? And it's really made me take stock in the relationships, and where I need to put my time and my energy, right? I also had one of my best friends passed away a couple months ago from COVID, right? It's a guy I got sober with. He worked in the industry with us, one of my best friends. And, he was such an instrumental part of his organization that he represented. And it's, when he passed away, like, the organization had to replace him, right? I mean, that's just the nature, the company that he worked for wasn't just going to shut down. And it kind of opened my eyes to, like, hey, if I, die tomorrow, like, the work isn't the most important thing, because they'll replace me. I mean, they're going to have to. So with his passing, it kind of really opened my eyes to what's important, and it's sad that it takes something like that to really open my eyes. But at the same time, it's kind of the way my life has gone, and the way that God teaches me lessons. And it's sometimes he needs to slap me to wake me up,
Yeah. Yeah, it is funny to think that realizing that you're expendable in some way could provide some relief.
Right. No, I mean, it does.
Because there's places where you're not expendable.
Right.
Right. And your life has value. Sorry to interrupt you, Shelly.
Oh, that's all right. I was just thinking back on your story, Tate, and the idea that you don't really have this trauma history where you can go, yeah, I can say the traumas, the big T traumas and the little T traumas caused me to look for addiction, to self-medicate. You've got this inner peace that you really haven't, you said you've probably been born with, which is kind of that piece of nobody's excluded from the world of addiction, right? It's doesn't have any bounds. It goes after, whoever it finds. And just the way you explained that, I think, is super powerful for some people who are like you said, there's no reason that I should, be stuck in addiction. There's no reason why I should have gone down that path. I should have been an accountant and all of these other pieces. But that journey has been super powerful for you, and changing the way you see your world, and creating that constant improvement, right? Doing therapy and engaging in ways that really help you improve and grow along the way. So in many ways, it's been a blessing, even though you didn't really have experiences that caused it.
Right. It's the experiences did come eventually, right? That's that wasn't my experience on why I initially started using drugs and alcohol. However, the trauma did come, right? And I think that subconsciously I was always searching for an excuse as to why I was the way that I was. And especially when I got heavily involved in drinking and drugging, I always kind of needed that excuse as to why I was a drug addict. And whenever I would have some sort of trauma pop up in my life, I would attach to that, right? I would make it my, when I would have a friend die, I would put more of the blame on myself, even though the blame didn't necessarily fall with me. I always felt into that victim mentality of, dude, I'm going to blame myself so I can feel worse and like justify using or getting high. Right. I mean, I did that for a number of years. Growing up, throughout high school, I mean, I could see that I was fully a drug addict by the time I was a senior in high school, right? Eating Xanax every day, smoking weed every day, drinking, blacking out on the weekends. But really, my drug addiction really kind of took off when I went to the University of Alabama. I joined a fraternity, and it was just like the perfect storm of, I could get whatever I wanted to. I don't have mom and dad breathing down my neck. The only thing really that I wanted to do was get high and party. And it was the perfect reason. It was the perfect environment to do that. And I mean, out of all the schools I looked at when I graduated, I went to Alabama because when I went and I toured, it was just like the perfect party environment. They were good at football. I mean, there was no academic reasons why I chose that school, right? There were pretty girls and they liked to party, and I was all in. And that's why I went there, you know. When I was in college for the first time, and because I started using drugs, I was probably in 7th grade when I first started smoking and drinking. I never really developed a sense of identity. I was always kind of who you wanted me to be, right? And that happens, I think, a lot from kind of what I alluded to when we first started talking, of the fear of never being good enough. I'm never good enough in any situation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be who I need to be in any situation I go into, right? So when I was in college, I started having grand mal seizures due to Xanax withdrawal. And when you have seizures in Alabama or Georgia, I don't know what the law is out in Utah, but they take your license for 6 months. So they took my license for 6 months, and I had to essentially go back and live at home with my parents because I couldn't drive. I medically withdrew from school, and going back and living with my parents, whatever sense of identity I had that was wrapped up in this frat boy partying, I'm trying to put it nice. I was just a D-bag, right? Like I'm trying to, like, that's what I was. It's funny. My first counselor I ever had at Blue Ridge called me a frat boy douchebag, like that's just who I was. Right. And that identity left. So I didn't know who I was. I come back and I'm living with my parents at home. And I remember one of my good buddies, he went to Auburn. He was back for the summer, or he came back for a couple days, and me and him went up to his lake house for a few days, and we partied. We were getting high, and it was just a blast. We had such a blast for a few days. He drove me back home, and essentially what happened was he goes, when he drops me off, he's like, Tate, I've had a blast this weekend. I'm going to go back to Auburn, finish my summer school finals. I'm going to come back. We'll pick you up and we'll just spend the rest of the summer at my lake house. I was like, okay, this is great. I can hang out with my friends. I can be this guy that I've essentially built up for myself and just party the rest of the summer. But what ended up happening was he went back, he finished his finals on a Wednesday. The night after he finished, he ended up overdosing and dying from a combination of oxymorphone and cocaine. And instead of being with him that weekend at the lake, I was attending his funeral, right? And it was really hard for me to kind of grasp the fact that, and this goes back to searching for that excuse, right? And I put his death on me in a way because I was with him the weekend before, getting high and partying and doing the same things that he did the night that he died, right? And I put that on me, and I kind of ran with that, for a while. So after he passed away, just kind of furthered my excuse to continue to get high. And, this was the first time that I ever tried the geographical relocation to deal with the drug addiction, right? So I was like, well, maybe Tuscaloosa is the problem. So what I'll do is I'll move up to Athens, Georgia, which is where the University of Georgia is, right? Because, I don't know if you know anything about Athens, but it's essentially like, it's just like Tuscaloosa, right? There's literally no difference. If anything, there's probably like 20 or 30 more bars, right? So I move up there and I'm doing the same thing that I'm doing in Tuscaloosa. And I continue to have health problems regarding, my Xanax use. I'm fully, I'm fully engaged in drugs and alcohol at this point, and I started to really fall in love with opiates while I was up there. A lot of my friends started to do oxycodone 30 milligrams, and that was kind of like my first love when I was up there. And whenever I would come across some money, I would buy oxy and Xanax. But whenever I had to like scrounge and just like hustle and just get by, I would just buy the oxy, which would cause me to have withdrawals from the Xanax and have a grand mal seizure. All right. I've got scars all over my head from falling out and hitting water spigots and things of that nature. But what, and after like my second seizure I had up there, I moved back in with my parents and lived in my basement and lived in my parents' basement. And, my identity was taken from me once again. And, I did that for about 6 months, and all the people that I knew back home at that time that were living there were fully wrapped up in the opiate epidemic that had just a stranglehold on Atlanta in the northern parts and the suburbs of Atlanta during that time. During the time it didn't get as much recognition as it does today. There have been A&E specials about what they call the triangle in Atlanta, and I lived right in the middle of it, so I get wrapped up in that. I start to do heroin for the first time, just because the oxy became too expensive. And essentially what happened was just started getting real bad again. And I try another geographical relocation at this time. I move up to Lexington, Kentucky with one of my best friends. His name was Justin. And me and Justin lived up there for about 6 months. And I was selling cars for his dad. I was a car salesman up there. Lived up there for about 6 months. And we didn't really have any connections in Lexington. Me being a good drug addict, I can find whatever I need to wherever, right? So, but we kind of stayed away from the opiates for a while. And, I'll never forget this. was a Thursday. It was the first college football game. It was Ole Miss against Boise State. We were planning on watching this, and Justin called me when we were at work, and he was just like, "Hey man, I found some dope. Do you want to do something?" I'm like, "Dude, I've been good for 6 months. Like, yeah, like let's go get some, just to kind of reward ourselves." And he went and picked some up, and we were watching the football game. Again, this was on like a Thursday, and he was leaving the next day to go back home to see his mom, who I call my second mom to this day. And I had a sales meeting the next morning, so we just got high, and I didn't think anything of it. And I went to bed early, and Justin stayed awake to watch TV or whatever. And I woke up the next morning and found that Justin had overdosed and died. I didn't know that he was dead when I had found him, and I started to give him CPR and wait for EMS and the police to arrive. But, I had always seen like Grey's Anatomy and shows on TV where, you give someone CPR, they come back, like that's just what I thought. And I thought that if I worked on him hard enough, he would come back. Right. Well, EMS shows up and they work on him. And eventually what they ended up telling me was by the time I had found Justin, he had been dead for about 4 hours. So after he died, that was kind of like my breaking point. The breaking point I think a lot of people get to where they get comfortable with dying a drug addict and an alcoholic. I just didn't care anymore. Whatever sense of a person I was, it just kind of went away when I found out that he died, and having to go back to Atlanta for his funeral and seeing his mom and all of the friends that we grew up with. It just, it robbed me of whatever humanity I had left. It really did. And that was just another really good excuse for being a drug addict. And I ran with that for a little bit longer. And essentially what ended up happening was my family put me in treatment for the first time. And I went to an IOP, an intensive outpatient program in Roswell, Georgia, because I didn't want to do residential, right? Like, dude, I'm not going to go away for however long and stay in this program. And it's actually really funny because I got kicked out because I couldn't quit using. And it's funny because I actually met with the lady that kicked me out of the program on Zoom a couple weeks ago. Right. So she didn't remember me, but now that I do what I do, she has her own private practice. She's trying to network with other professionals in like the addiction area. She sends me this link and we're going to meet. And I was like, "Do you not remember me?" And she's like, "No, like, should I?" And I was like, "The last time I saw you, you made me read my drug test to my parents in your office." And her face just dropped. And she's like, "I can't believe that I don't remember you." I was like, "Well, I remember you, and that was kind of the first time I was ever.
When you look back at that, is that like an experience that bothers you? Like, does it bug you about this woman? Or when you look back at it, you're like, she did the right thing. Like, this was supposed to be good for me. Or is this, you know what I mean? Is this a soft spot for you?
Oh, no, absolutely. Like, she did the right thing 100%. At the time I was pissed at her, right? Because I was like, how dare you send me to residential treatment and quit allowing me to get high? Shame on you for doing your job. But now I look back and it's just kind of like a funny story, right? And I'm so grateful for her and for like the primary therapist that I had there for forcing me to go to residential treatment because it saved my life. But yeah, it's just really funny looking back on it today, right? Because I lit that drug test up like a Christmas tree, like it it was terrible and it was so awkward. But it forced me to go to Blue Ridge for my first time, right? And I say my first time because, after the first time going to Blue Ridge, I didn't stay sober. I went to Blue Ridge, and for 35 days, I was a problem when I was up there, right? I didn't want to be there. I thought that this whole thing was one big overreaction. I hated my counselor. And I just didn't, I wasn't invested in the 12 steps. I thought I could just figure this stuff out on my own. And, the whole time we're there, Blue Ridge is really heavy on like aftercare, right? Like, what are you going to do after you leave here that puts you in a position for the greatest success in long-term sobriety? Like, that's where we're going to put you. Well, I told my counselor on about like day 15, like, dude, just don't even talk to me about aftercare. I'm going home after this. I'll figure it out. Like, everything will be fine. So my parents show up on day 36, and I've got all my stuff packed, and my counselor's like, hey man, we're going to have a quick meeting with your parents. So I was like, all right, cool. So they all sit me down and they're like, Tate, we found this place for you to go. It's in Opelika, Alabama, and you're going to go here for the next 6 months. And I was like, y'all are crazy, right? Like, that's not what we talked about. And the whole time my counselor's just sitting there just like stone faced. Like, they had worked out this whole program behind my back, and they were essentially like, you either go here or we're going to drop you off at a homeless shelter. So I was like, I can't believe like I got forced into this. Right. I mean, I even remember calling my counselor when I'm on my way down there and politely telling them to go have sex with themselves. Right. Like, I was pissed. But thank God they did that, because if they didn't do that, I wouldn't have had the step 2 experience that I had when I was at this program in Opelika. And it's really funny too. I'm not sure if you guys know where Opelika, Alabama is, but it's right outside the city of Auburn, Alabama. And Auburn is the University of Alabama's biggest rival. So I was like, dude, God's really got a sense of humor, right? Because I'm a diehard Alabama football fan. You're going to send me to get sober in Auburn, Alabama? Like, I was just like, God is really laughing at me now, and like, what a humbling experience that was. But it was the first time in my life, I'll never forget this. There's a gentleman by the name of Jared. Jared worked for the Reprieve, and sitting outside at the smoking pit, and I'm smoking a cigarette, and this guy gets out of a car, and it's a nice car, and he's got a haircut, nice clothes on, wedding ring, and it's this guy I used to get high with back in college. And he was, by no stretch of the imagination, like the worst junkie that I had ever seen. Right at that point, I mean, there was one time I went to go buy pills from this guy, and there were so many Whippet canisters on his ground that I had to like shimmy my way into his room. Right, all the lights were turned off because he couldn't pay the light bill, and he had candles all over the place. And I was like, geez, I never want to be like this guy. Right. And I'm outside smoking, and Jared hops out of this car, and I'm like, no freaking way that this is Jared Murray. And I would run over to him. I'm like, dude, like, I thought you died. Like, what happened? And it's like, man, I work here now, and, I'm 5 years sober. And this was probably 5-6 years ago that me and him had this conversation, or 6 or 7 years ago that we had this conversation. And it was the first time in my life that I got, that I saw that this thing really worked, and people that, got high like I did. But even after that experience, it still wasn't enough to convince me that I had to do things in order to stay sober. Right. So after I get out of the Reprieve, I go back to Kentucky, and I move in with this girl that I had been seeing. right? Because that'll fix you. Right. So I thought she could fix me, and obviously that didn't go well. I lived up there. I don't even remember for how long, and I kind of just like packed my stuff and realized I was miserable, and I wasn't using or drinking when I was up there, but I wasn't doing anything to add value to my life, to add value to my sobriety. I was essentially just a dry drunk, living in her house, and I was just so miserable. I kind of packed up my stuff, and the day that I moved back to Atlanta, I was smoking crack again that day that I moved back, and got involved in like the real estate business for a little bit. Ended up stealing a bunch of money from this real estate company that I worked for, to kind of fund my drug addiction, my drug habit during this relapse. Went to a sober living, and the sober living that I was at, I knew the owner really well. It was kind of a brand new program, because the last thing I ever wanted to do was go back to Blue Ridge, right, and show my face there. And when I was there, I think the 5 out of the 6 people that I was in the program with were getting high, right? And essentially, the owner eventually like found out about it and kicked me out, right? He only kicked me out though because he found my roommate's dope in my bathroom, right? And it wasn't even mine, right? But I was getting high, so I definitely deserved to be kicked out. But I was like, what the hell? Like this isn't adding up. And by this time, my parents were done with me. I had no friends. I had nothing going for me. The only thing that I had was my car. And essentially what I did for the next couple months was I lived in a Burger King parking lot in downtown Atlanta, kind of middlemaning drugs for people in North Atlanta that didn't have the connections that I had. I would get hot. I would, get a little bit of heroin here and there, and $1 or $2 for like a McDonald's hamburger. And in the times when I wasn't kind of middlemaning deals for people, I found this movie theater that didn't check ticket stubs, so you could just walk in and watch movies. So what I would do is I would get high in this movie theater and eat people's like leftover popcorn and candy and stuff, and it's what I did for a couple months. I've probably seen Star Wars Rogue One 45 times. I will never watch that movie again. I can tell you line by line everything that's about to happen. But I did that for a couple months, and finally my dad called me one day, and it had been months since we talked, and he was like, pretty much like, son, I don't know where you are, what you're doing, but if you can make it back home, we'll take you to treatment one last time. And I showed back up at their house, and they took me to Blue Ridge on January 18th, 2017. And that's the last time to this day, I haven't taken a drink or drug since. I don't know what was different about the last time that I came into Blue Ridge. I wish I could pinpoint it. I think that I subconsciously realized that, hey, if this doesn't happen for you now, you probably aren't going to make it. And I just said, screw it, let's try it. Right. I remember like meditating when I was up there. And one of the most impactful things that someone said to me when I was up there, I was talking with one of the techs, and I was like, man, I think with my life, I finally realized that I'm not supposed to do anything special or anything important. Maybe I'm just kind of meant to help people. And I remember telling him that, and he kind of looks me dead in my face, and he goes, I don't know what your sense of important or special is, but that sounds pretty damn special to me. Right. And I complete treatment there, and they sent me to a sober living in Kennesaw. And I'm so lucky that I got hooked up with the people that I got hooked up with in the recovery community up here. And there are 3 individuals that were recovery coaches at my really 4 people that I got involved with, and their names are Cody, Brandon, Chris, and Sharif. And these guys, for the first time in my life, like made me excited about recovery, right? And they showed me how to get a sponsor, and they helped me work the 12 steps, and they helped me budget money, and they helped me grocery shop, and they just helped me become a grown-up for the first time in my life, you know. And they showed me what it meant to be like a man, not only, you know, in recovery, but with all the things that, you know, I should be doing as a 25-year-old man, you know. And those guys saved my life. And without Blue Ridge and without these individuals, I probably wouldn't be here today. I ended up taking a job as a house manager there, and then I was a recovery coach, and then I worked for an intensive outpatient that they had there doing like admissions and business development stuff. And, you know, one day I was having coffee with my boss, who's my boss now. Her name's Dr. Colleen Gray. And she's asking me, it's funny because there's this lady, her name's Chris. And she did what I did at this intensive outpatient program before she moved to Blue Ridge. And then after she left to do BD at Blue Ridge, she is now like the program director of an eating disorder facility here in Atlanta. And so when she left, she recommended me for the position at Blue Ridge. So I tell her all the time, like, listen, I need to go back to school and finish, you know, so I can be the program director of an eating disorder facility next, right? But I just remember having coffee with my now boss, and she'd be like, hey, you know, I'm looking for a new BD rep, and you've come recommended, but I don't know if you're interested. Do you know anyone that might be interested? And I was just kind of like, this is my dream job, to go back and work for Blue Ridge. And we have coffee for like an hour, and she's like, well, you can come in for a formal interview next week, but you've got the job. And I was just kind of like, are you like, really? Like, this doesn't happen, you know, to homeless drug addicts and stuff. And I thought it was just kind of one big joke. And there were other people that interviewed for this position that were way more qualified for it than I was. And I don't know, for whatever reason, God kind of saw it fit for me to go back and work for them. And I had the interview, and you know, when I was driving home, I got an offer letter, you know, and I remember calling my dad, and I'm like, Dad, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with an offer letter, right? Like, guys like me don't get offer letters. He's like, sign it, dumbass, and send it back to them, you know? So, and, you know, ever since I've been at Blue Ridge, it's probably been one of the most impactful, if not the most impactful jobs that I've ever had in my life. And essentially it just becomes from the leadership that I've been blessed to fall under. Right. I mean, I remember the first time me speaking with Todd, you know, and he's essentially asking me like what my job is here. Right. And I give him, you know, the corporate answer that I think he wants to hear. Right. Like, oh, I need to go out in the community and build these relationships to bring in new business and yada, yada, yada. Right. And he just kind of is like, no, like, that's not what you're going to do. What you're going to do is every individual that you meet, you're going to see how you can add value to their lives. And if you can continue to do that, I'll never hound you about quote unquote numbers. And for the past, you know, almost 3 years, I've been doing this job. Never one time has he ever put any pressure on me to produce. Right. And to be honest with you, he hasn't had to, you know, just the outright success that you can have from going and meeting with people and doing whatever you can to add value to their lives and to just help the people that they come across every day. There's something about that level of honesty and transparency and service that has helped me more professionally than ever, writing out some, cost benefit analysis. Right. And just having that sort of leadership, it's something that you couldn't pay for, right? You can't put a price on that. And it's since I've been here too, just because of the reputation that Blue Ridge has and the leadership I fall under, I've been offered some pretty amazing jobs with more money and, essentially just really great opportunities. But I haven't left because I'm so drawn to the culture that Blue Ridge has, to the leadership under Todd and my boss, Dr. Gray, that I still feel like I have so much to learn. And I don't feel like I'm at a position in my life that I'm willing to give that up yet. It's also one of these things that I've been very blessed to have such a great relationship with my father to this day, who's a very successful businessman. And it's really cool to see how the dynamic of our relationship has changed, right? Like, obviously I will always be his son, but he doesn't have to take care of me anymore. Right. So I can go with him, and it's more of a friendship to this day, and being able to bounce not only like professional questions I have for him, but personal questions as well. Like when doing my relationship with my girlfriend to this day, and buying a house or buying a car, and just like asking him for things. And, he essentially can, has made me stay at Blue Ridge because he's like, listen, I have left positions that you've been in for more money that cost me in the long run because I didn't have what you have where you are now. So being able to kind of have that dynamic shift and get advice from him is something that I'm so grateful for to this day.
It's an incredible story that you share, Tate. And as I'm listening to you hear the story, share your story and all of the different aspects, relationships and family, and, trying to figure out what your identity is. And I know you've told I suspect in your line of work, you share your story with people frequently, right? Because that's really a way to connect with them. What's the power of sharing your story? Because I can tell, I can see your face as you're sharing your story, and the way you go back and think about those moments in time and those pivotal moments where you could have easily overdosed as your friend did, and it could have been you as opposed to somebody else. Those moments that you had when you share your story, what does that do for you?
Well, for me, it helps me. It helps me stay grounded and helps me stay humble, right? Because I know that very quickly I can be right back into position to the people I'm telling my story to, right? There's a homeless shelter that I love to go speak at. And whenever I speak there, it's very humbling, and I probably get more out of sharing my story there than the clients do, right? But it also, lets me know that, what I have been able to overcome in my life is a direct result of, God and the power that God has. And essentially that the only position that I am here, and the only reason I'm in the position that I'm in today, is to essentially show other people like the power that God can have in their lives too. Essentially kind of what that third step prayer talks about, right? Like that's the only reason that I'm in the position that I am in today. And I also love going up to Blue Ridge and speaking with the clients up there because they see a guy who walks in, who dresses nice, right? And can talk well. And they're like, dude, no way this guy has any idea what it's like. And, when I get to the part of my story where I'm like, yeah, I used to sit in these chairs and listen to people come in and tell their story, like their faces and their jaws kind of drop, they're like, no way. Like half the time these people don't believe me. And it's a really cool and a really humbling experience to be able to kind of look back and see where my life was, where it is today, and the trajectory that it continues to be on.
Well, and I think, when you're in the heart of an addiction, or mental illness for that matter, it feels like you're isolated and alone, and you really don't know who you can trust. And sharing your story, like the heart of hearts, that story of what you're really experiencing. For one, I don't know if you can connect with it, but for two, I don't think you believe you can share it. Like it's even an option to share it with anybody. And so there's a huge power in sharing that story, like you've talked about, and allowing other people to be part of your life and that connection, because that's really, I think, at least as when I hear your story, it's those connections and those relationships that were huge in you being able to shift and turn that corner.
No, absolutely. And, I'm very vocal, and I'm very transparent about my sobriety through like social media, and, just things of that nature. It's funny. My parents, when I first got sober, they were always like, do you want us to tell people like you're sober and all this stuff? And I'm like, yeah, tell everybody. Right. Because in the last 5 years, the number of, not only people like in recovery, like that's kind of to be expected for people in recovery to reach out to you, but the people that I used to go to high school with that are now struggling with substance abuse, the people that I was in a fraternity with, right? The people that hated me, right, for being a drug addict, and they're now struggling. It's such a blessing to be able to, take the platform that I've been given and show people the power of the 12 steps in God and how it can transform your life, and I'm as vocal about that as anybody, because I'm extremely lucky to be where I am. And one of the most impactful things that's happened to me recently was, Justin has, my buddy Justin, who passed away, someone in his family was struggling with mental health and substance abuse, and they called me, and I was able to help that individual. Right. And I just thought like what a blessing that is to be able to give back to his family in a way that I never thought I'd be able to.
It's interesting how life, those shifts and those changes that we make allow us to be that, that instrument, or that, that helping piece for other people that you could have never been that had you stayed in your addiction. But look at how powerful that addiction has now, transformed you and helped you grow from. It's pretty incredible to watch. And your story is unique, but there's a lot of other stories just like yours out there, right? That, where people have just, they are all about passionate about helping others. And I think it's incredible. So I love what you have to share. I love what you guys are doing at Blue Ridge, because obviously it's made a huge difference and it'll continue to make a huge difference. Pretty incredible. I think it's important for listeners, because, people are going to connect with your story and they're going to want to know how to connect with you. So maybe take a second and share your contact information and anything you think is important for them to know if they're also seeking sobriety.
Sure. So my contact information, I give my cell phone out to whoever. I mean, you guys have seen it's rang a few times since we've been on the call, and thank God for do not disturb mode, because I had to throw that on real quick. But my cell phone number is 404-452-3220. My email address is tate.sams, so tate.sams, SAMS, at blueridgemountainrecoverycenter.com. Probably you can either call me, shoot me a text, email me. I always return whatever I get. And, I think my biggest thing for people out there that, that are kind of searching for what I've been so freely given is, I'm glad that everyone's story is not like mine, because if it was, the people that have been where I've been, we wouldn't be able to help the people that are going to come down the road, because there are so many people with different stories of mine that can kind of make that connection with people that I wouldn't be able to, right? There have been so many people that I spoke with that have similar stories of mine, and they hear me, and then they can see that little ray of hope that, like, oh, if this guy can do it, so can I. But there are also guys that have no like no semblance with me, or nothing in common with me, and they hear me speak and they're like, I don't know, like, whatever, right? And so I'm just so thankful that there are so many people with so many different stories that enable us to help the amount of people that we do.
Yeah, because that's the end goal, right? That's always the end goal, is let's help people. Let's get people healthy so that they can live these happy, productive lives that they think are out of reach. So appreciate the work that you do, Tate, and thanks for taking some time out of your busy schedule to talk with us and share your story. It's been very impactful. It made me think about my own story, and different ways that I can improve my life as well, which is a constant process for all of us.
Absolutely. Thank you guys again for having me on today. I'm very blessed that you guys asked me to do this, and continue the good work you guys are doing. You've got a new follower for the podcast, so thank you guys so much for having me.
Thanks for coming on. One of the people we've had on recently was Edward Bailey, and he's got a group called The Net. And it's kind of a network of, so he's doing interventions, and in his process of kind of crossing the country trying to find quality care for patients, right? Quality treatment centers to send people to. He's been establishing kind of this network of quality facilities to connect to each other so they can continue to talk about like best practices. Because we know there's obviously a spectrum of quality care in the industry, right?
Sure.
And I think their motto is like patients before profit, right? So anyways, I'd like to make sure we get you and Todd connected with him, because you guys obviously fit that category. And I was on one of their meetings this week. A bunch of nonprofits, right? A bunch of big community groups that are involved in that as well. But anyways, I think that could be a good connection for you guys. So let's make sure we get that set up.
Absolutely.
So, okay, thanks for being on. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you guys.